Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors China webinar series on managing your accounting and tax in China. You have joined us for day 4, part 4 of this series, where we will be looking at implementing an internal control system for your China business. I'll be sharing with you a variety of tips in regards to your China business, everything from controlling the company shops all the way through controlling expense claims. It is going to be about a 60-minute session today, so do get yourselves prepared, and I do recommend taking a pen and paper to write notes. The whole purpose of this week's webinar series is to provide an overview of the tax and accounting arena in China in relation to profits tax, VAT, avoiding tax audits, developing internal control systems, and obviously the big question that people ask is profit repatriation strategies. So let us get started with today's session. As I know everybody, I've been looking through the attendee list. I'm familiar with everybody that's already on here live today. So I usually start off these presentations trying to get an understanding of who are the newbies, who are the startups, and who are the experienced China hands in China. This is usually how I do my introductions. It's just a way for me to get to know who the audience is. If you are new to the series and you've just joined today, please do let me know. Are you a newbie? Are you a startup? Or are you an experienced China? Since many people have joined from the previous sessions, I already have an understanding of who is a finance manager and who is a non-finance individual. I am going to gear the presentation today to non-finance people because there's going to be a variety of information I'll be going through. So if you don't have a finance background, don't worry. The terms that I'll be using will be really simplified so you have a clear understanding. How the webinar works is that I educate you. So I'll be providing a lot of tips today about developing internal control systems that if you do already have an entity of China or you're about to set one up, these are things that I would highly recommend you to implement. If you have any questions or comments, please insert them into the chat section of the control panel. I hope to have an interactive Q&A, although for the last 3 sessions, there's been no interaction whatsoever. So my hopes aren't really up, but if you do have questions, I will be staying on for sure to answer them. Use this time wisely. It is your time spent. So again, either you can contact me directly or you can also interact during the Q&A. From a technical perspective, if you run into issues with your internet connection or the stability on the GoToWebinar or the sound system, unfortunately, I will not be able to help you as I'm speaking and presenting. Just know that the recording will go up on our YouTube channel and you'll be able to reflect back on it later on. If I run into technical issues, it usually does take 30 seconds to 1 minute for me to reboot, come back on, and I will be finishing the session today. If you have the ability to stay on, time permitting, please do. But if not, just know that the recording will be up on the YouTube channel. Who am I? My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have 17 years of experience in the corporate services and compliance sector in China, predominantly based out of Shanghai. My focus is purely on inbound investment into China. So my portfolio of clientele are purely foreign investors that are expanding into the Hong Kong and Chinese market. And we help them through their whole China roadmap methodology. So creating strategies, getting them a step-by-step plan, a checklist of things they have to think about when entering the market, when they're already in the market, so that they have the ability to focus on growth and to lead really a performing business in the Chinese market. I will be performing my last webinar for 2020 on December 8th on the China roadmap, basically designing your own China roadmap, which is unique to every single company. If you are interested in joining that session, it is a workshop. I will be providing a handout to people so that they can actually create and design their step-by-step plan as we are speaking on the webinar session. It will be Tuesday, December 8th. The link for registration is on our events page on our website. I'm going to add that into the chat box now so you can have a direct link to that. And I hope to see you all there, as it will be the last session for 2020. So let's get cracking on today's session, which is looking at internal control systems for your organization in China. All right. And we are going to start off today's session with a very simple one, which is talking about how to implement an internal control system in relation to your company CHOPS. Okay. When you set up your company in China, you will be provided with a whole series of company CHOPS. They're also known as seals or stamps, and they have a very unique feature in terms of doing business in China. CHOPS are engraved with given company details such as registered legal name, the legal representative's name, etc. And these company CHOPS should be considered as official and legal signatures. In the West, you would have an actual signature of somebody. Here, the CHOPS are legal signatures that are placed on legally authorized documents. Now, the risks are relatively high in relation to using the company CHOPS. Okay, it is not uncommon for personnel or people in your office, if you're keeping the CHOPS within your office, to seize the company CHOPS as well as the business licenses and certificates and use them as a negotiation for the termination. Okay, so I had a client up in Beijing. This was really a long time ago, maybe 12, 13 years ago. The American firm had a rep office in Beijing. They had a Chinese general manager or chief representative that was based in the Beijing office. They unfortunately did their termination over the phone versus doing it in person, and then obviously taking the equipment at that point in time. So the chief rep, his intention was not to do it maliciously. I think in the end he lost face. It was a cultural aspect to it, and he seized the business license and company CHOPS and basically told the American company he wasn't going to give them back until the compensation and severance was more desirable. So be aware of what this can do to your organization. All companies should develop internal control systems in relation to the CHOPS, okay? And there are a variety of control systems that you can create. You need to create one that is convenient, where you have the ability to efficiently supervise how those CHOPS are being utilized. So one of those control methods is dividing the responsibility of the CHOPS among key personnel. It can either be key personnel or it can also be outsourced providers, whether that's lawyers, corporate service providers, or whomever, rather than just normal employees that are involved in the day-to-day operations, okay? And there are ways that, the CHOPS can be used efficiently. For example, if we keep the company CHOP on behalf of a client, a contract needs to be signed, it's emailed to us, we print it out in duplicates or triplicates, however are needed, we CHOP it, and then we courier it directly to the client. It all happens within a 24 to 48 hour system, okay? So you can't really say that it's not an efficient process, and you are spreading the liability of the use of these CHOPS, okay? The second control method is implementing additional security procedures, like, for example, a logbook, or having alternatives. So, for example, if somebody in the management or within your outsourced provider is going on holiday, that there is a replacement individual that has access to those company CHOPS so that you are never going through a period of inefficiency. For example, for myself, I'm not right now, not in China. I'm blocked. I have the inability to re-enter the country. And as a consequence, I have my company CHOP and my legal rep CHOP never leaving my side, okay? Those two CHOPs are with me at all times. I have the ability to print stuff off, CHOP on it, and courier it back to China. Obviously, I've got the courier cost to consider, but it is the way for me to make sure that the two key CHOPs that are used to legalize and authenticate documentation as well as bank transfers are with me, all right? So we don't keep internally a logbook because I'm chopping off of everything and I know what I'm signing. If you don't want to do that in-house and you want to outsource it, your outsourced provider or employee or GM should be keeping a logbook so that they can show you how things are being utilized and what shops are being used for what and when. The next tip that I'm going to offer you is in relation to internal controls for the actual business functions related to the company. And that means sales, billing, and collection, purchasing, and human resource. Okay. Now, in most Western countries, businesses will establish sound internal control mechanisms to protect their assets, to smoothen the business operations, and obviously to prevent risks from materializing any type of losses. All right. Now, in most companies, when they start up in China, their mindset is we are too small to be implementing any internal control systems. My belief is that is completely wrong. You should be developing internal control systems from day one. And the easiest way to do that is almost to replicate what you have as internal control systems in your head office, to replicate those into your China business, and then amend as you are starting to develop that business, because you will realize that in China, there are environmental, cultural, and value differences in regards to doing business and operating your company. So you will have to reassess those internal controls that you have created for your head office that you're implementing in China. You just have to adapt them over time to see what is then efficient, but it's the simplest way to start off and the easiest way actually to start off. So the first item I want to look at is sales, billing, and collection. All right. And for me, this is really probably the biggest area where fraud can occur or corruption could occur, because you're not only dealing with the physical transaction of goods, but also of money. Okay. So you need to have a robust and rigid internal policy created. Now, you might be thinking, in what way? Well, just very simply, similar to your head office, right? You might have a variety of different products that have different price ranges, but those need to be set. You need to have a very clear and distinct fee structure. In addition to that, you need to say to your salespeople, well, with every client, there's room for negotiation, but you then have to create a range for that negotiation. If you're providing a discount, what is that permissible range? All right. If the salesperson feels they could charge more, what is that permissible range? All right. So you have to have this document, first of all, that highlights the products and the fee structures related to those products, plus a discount range, okay, that is applicable. But even more importantly, in order to be able to avoid kickbacks or side payments or whatever from salespeople, you need to make sure that there is an approval process. So although you have the set price ranges per product, if you're going outside of that, you need to go and get approval first. Otherwise, you cannot give that option to your clients, okay? So you need to have line managers that are in place, all right? Have a hierarchy within your organization that salespeople need to report to somebody in relation to the price offers that are being determined. My recommendation would be to have weekly sales calls to highlight these things and have those open discussions so that everybody learns and has an understanding about the decisions that the line managers are going to make, but also to have that level of transparency. In addition to that, if there are going to be credit limit thresholds for different types of clients, clients all have different sizes, the length of relationship is different, you are going to create credit limits that are available, right? Either you're going to have a set credit limit or you're going to make exceptions here or there, all right? But what you probably want to do first is vet your client to make sure that they have the ability to pay you, okay? It's a due diligence on your client, right? You want to know that they have the ability and good financial as well as legal good standing to be able to pay you. So just doing a simple background due diligence check on them will help a lot in determining what type of credit limits you want to be able to offer them. And then ultimately, once a sale is completed, you've got to close the loop, okay? You've got to get inventory, shipping, and invoicing all into that discussion so that everybody has a level of transparency. Now, you might all think that this is common sense, but if you are opening an office in China and you are not there to lead this direction and you don't have documents highlighting the operational guidelines, trust me, you will be building up a team who do their own thing versus actually following your operational guideline and having that open level of transparency. So you need the whole office community, whether they're based overseas or whether they're based in China, to get involved and understand for each client, what is the sales, what is the inventory requirement, what is the shipping process and invoicing process, okay? And most importantly, you've got to make sure that the relevant invoice is sent out with the shipment, all right? You've got to make sure that the whole cycle is properly closed so that there's no leakages whatsoever. And your financial team have to be involved in the process. They can't be the last ones to know everything. They need to be involved in the process so that they can also close the loop, because if you are selling a product, it means you've purchased a product, right? And that whole loop needs to be closed in relation to VAT and all of the supporting documentation, okay? So there has to be that level of open communication. The same can be said about purchasing, right? So very similar with the whole selling concept, you probably will also have standard price ranges for purchasing processes, right? You need to be able to routinely compare the expected cost of an item against the actual cost, okay? You've got to do your benchmarking also to understand what are the ranges in pricing for those types of products. What you don't want to happen to you is the fact that you've been paying an average of 600 RMB. I'm using an example from the slide. You're paying an average of 600 RMB for a product which is actually expected to only cost 500, all right? If you are noticing that, that is a red flag, and you've got to realize, okay, is that a miscalculation, or are employees falsely invoicing and pocketing the money? Okay, these are all the types of things you have to think about. So to prevent fraud, all right, make sure, again, you've got line managers that are involved in the process, okay? You want to do your benchmarking amongst suppliers so that you know what the price ranges are. You do it with, I don't know, as many as you can, maybe 3 or 4 different suppliers. And you obviously want to have the whole team involved, from purchasing to inventory to shipping to finance, okay? You want to be able to close the whole loop. Now, historically, what a lot of foreign investors did, especially those that were practicing purely the merchandising, i.e. the purchasing side of things in China, they actually put staff on rotation in order to avoid fraud. Meaning that, you know, if somebody was working in the merchandising department for 2 years, they suddenly would push them to the shipping department, or to the inventory department, or to the trade documentation department, or wherever. There was a rotation of employees amongst the teams so that nobody had one fixed relationship with a supplier where kickbacks would then have been possible, right? So it's just a way to avoid that fraud. So in this regard, we've looked at the sales, the billing, we've looked at purchasing. Now let's also look at human resources, okay? Because that can also happen where fraud occurs and issues arise, all right? Now, when companies start off in China, I always get the whole spiel, Christina, we're small, we don't need to do things so thorough, we don't necessarily have a budget to do things all thorough. But again, my mind frame is, you're starting fresh. Make sure you've got all of your internal processes in place so that you never have to think about it again. It is much harder to impose internal control policies and systems when you are a team of 20 than if you were a team of 1. Okay? So why am I saying it's so important to develop something with human resources? Because your mindset when you start off in China, which was my mindset, was that every single person I hire in my startup base is of value. I have to develop a relationship, I have to develop trust, and I have to develop loyalty in a much shorter period of time, because every single person I hire is of value, okay, and is basically essential. So I got into a mindset when I first started up in China that I couldn't rock the boat. If I would terminate somebody, then maybe somebody else would follow, and then I would have to get new people in, and then, what about the customer service? Clients would get the impression that I'm volatile and I don't have a stable company organization. So I just simply didn't want to rock the boat. But that just meant I never terminated the underperforming employees. And I also didn't have the right documentation to be able to terminate people properly. I didn't have an employee handbook in place. I also didn't spend much time screening and reviewing candidates because I was in a tremendous rush in my startup phase. I needed to get people on board because my growth was so extravagant. But if I would redo it, and I would do it over again, first of all, I would do a screening process. Definitely. When I would interview people, I would filter them through, but I would have a multi-stage interview process, which I have now, and I would test them. So usually I always provide a case study test, and it's different for different levels of people that I'm hiring for. But when they are in the top 3 to top 5 of candidates, I ask them to do that and present then the results to me. And that's been a fantastic way for me to actually filter people out, because I test everything from character to seriousness to presentability to English capabilities, etc. In addition to that, especially with senior managers, I never did reference checks, which in the West you normally do, right? And you've got to imagine that in China, a lot of people fake their resumes. So doing a background check, i.e. vetting your employees, getting reference checks, and then actually taking that phone call to check that reference is fundamental, okay? Because what you want to do is you want to spend more time on hiring people in your startup phase than having to spend time later on an underperforming team, not wanting to rock the boat, and then when you rock the boat and you start terminating, having much higher compensation packages that would be owed, or severance packages that would have to be owed, and then having to retrain new people that join the company, okay? The ideal is you want to get it right from the beginning, and these are the steps to do that, okay? Don't rush the process. You want the most qualified people within your organization. Labor contracts, as well as employee handbooks, are fundamental for any company that is employing people in China. Number one, labor contracts are extremely important. If you don't sign a labor contract, you actually are required to pay double the monthly salary to the employees until the labor contract is signed, okay? In China, you can have 2 fixed-term labor contracts, but then the third one has to be an open-ended agreement. And you want these contracts to be bulletproof. You want to have confidentiality clauses. You want to have non-competition clauses. You want to have intellectual property rights clauses, okay? You may even want to have I forgot the phrase now. It'll come to me later. But you want to have you want basically bulletproof contracts that are protecting you in case people or employees are going to exit your organization and take stuff with them. Don't let them. Make sure you've got these contracts in place, okay? Employee handbooks are not a necessity, but having company policies in place are critical and fundamental, so that if an employee is breaching those policies, you have the ability to issue warning letters and finally to terminate, okay? Company policies can mean anything from setting a predefined allowance for travel, setting a predefined allowance for lunch meetings, setting a predefined criteria on remote working and office working, right? This is pertaining to COVID. Okay, so having that within your company policies or employee handbook is fundamental. Again, that booklet, although it may cost a little bit to create upfront, will be something that will help you to sustain a performing organization with great employees and having a great team. So when you are looking at the internal control systems for your business, you've got to identify your core needs and the core risks within your organization. And every single company may identify different things that are important to them. For example, if you're not selling into China, but you're purely purchasing and exporting, then that will be a core need and risk to create a compliance organization. If you are a brand organization and you are acquiring IP, then having licensing agreements in place will be fundamental for your business. Okay? If you are planning on developing a team, having employment contracts, employee handbooks, and then internal procedures to manage those employees in the form of company CHOP control systems, expense claim control systems, Fabio management systems, whatever. There's so much to think about. So you do need to identify the core needs, the core risks, and develop those internal control systems. Next, we're going to look at internal control systems for the finance. Okay, so first let's look at inventory management. Okay, very common, happens everywhere around the world, is you will find a mismatching of records between internal inventory systems and the warehouse management system used by your logistics provider. Okay, what's the solution? Very simple. Don't be lazy. Do spot checks. You should create, particularly in the early stages of your organization, create more frequent internal inventory checks to verify the records. And even if you don't have the staff to do it internally, use an outsourced provider. We offer that solution, for example, to do inventory spot checks, to just check the records, okay? Now, what I also recommend, particularly if you are in a sector where your product might be fragile or your product might have an expiry date, you may also want to check the quality of those products at the same time, okay? So to give you an example, we have done spot checks on companies that produce glassware. So that's a very fragile product. So we went in, we did the inventory check, but at the same time, we did do a spot checks on whether glasses were broken or not. And then if they were, we would get them out of the inventory. Or if you are in the food and beverage sector and you are looking to check on the expiry date of products, it's going, again, doing spot checks through that inventory check to check the expiry dates, and if something has expired, to get it out, okay? But this is how you are going to control your inventory. And doing it more than just once a year is something that I would highly recommend. The next is Fabio management, okay? So some of the problems are in the input Fabios and some are in the output Fabios. So if you joined on Tuesday's session, you'll know what the difference is between the input and the output Fabios. But the problems basically are, for example, no input Fabio was received for a purchase. So for example, your supplier didn't provide you with a Fabio, your accountant was not informed to get the Fabio, the supplier intentionally delays the issuance of the Fabio, your staff forgets to ask for the Fabio when the purchase happens. This is a huge problem because the loss of the input Fabios reduces the amount of input VAT for tax deduction, right? Another problem is the incorrect amount or information on the Fabios. And again, this can happen from human error, where your supplier just makes a manual mistake. But what it does lead to, if you don't check it, right, that's the issue, is you should be checking those Fabios when you get them, is that you are going to be declaring a much lower input VAT amount or a much higher one and not reflecting then the true status of your business, okay? So you want to make sure that you are issuing them and you are checking them. In terms of output FAPIAOs, two problems would be the duplicate FAPIAO for some sales. So your customers may request for the FAPIAO for the same sales twice, usually when they lose the first FAPIAO. If they lose the first FAPIAO, then you've got to cancel it. And that's where a lot of companies don't do that. So you are then actually doing a double FAPIAO entry and paying more VAT. Or you've got undetected sales receivables with FAPIAO issued. So what that means is that, as I highlighted on Tuesday, you have the choice of issuing the FAPIAO upfront or issuing the FAPIAO upon payment receipt. If you issue the FAPIAO upfront and your client does not settle that invoice, you are basically liable for that VAT payable, okay? And of course, the financial loss for you will not only be the loss of the revenue, but also in relation to the VAT liability, okay? So in some instances, you may want to issue just a pro forma invoice, wait for payment, and then issue the FAPIAO, all right? Solutions are basically, again, having operational guidelines and open dialogue and transparency between merchandisers who are coordinating with suppliers and salespeople who are coordinating with customers, as well as the finance team. And there has to be an operational guideline as to who has the responsibility within your organization to obtain the FAPIAOs or issue the FAPIAOs, okay? Is it the finance team? Is it going to be the merchandisers? Is it going to be the salespeople? There has to be a guideline on that, okay? If for one transaction it's the merchandiser, for another it's the finance, it's so confusing and messy. You want to have one system in place in order to be able to do that, and you need your finance team to be aware of all the transactions that are occurring. You need the merchandisers to communicate with the supplier, the merchandisers to communicate with the salespeople to communicate with the merchandisers, and then having the finance people, the logistics team to be involved as well. The biggest form of fraud when it comes to finance is expense claims, okay? Now, I'll just tell you a little bit of a story because I have always been against giving any form of allowance that I did allow it. I got fake rental FAPIAOs. I got FAPIAOs that weren't even related to the expense. So if I was giving a meal allowance, I was getting a FAPIAO for taxis. And it became so messy for me to control whether the FAPIAOs were really existing to the allowances or not. And it increased the time spent from my own accountant to go through all of that. So you've got to keep in mind that expense claims is intense work. It is paperwork heavy, and it is time consuming, and you have to be aware of that. But if you don't have clear policies within your organization about expense claims, and it goes unsupervised for a very long time, you will have employees who take advantage of that and then cause your company to have risks, whether that's tax liability risks, whether it's employee fraud, or whether it's in the loss of potential business. So I'm going to highlight in today's presentation three risks under expense claims. One is additional tax liabilities, the second is employee fraud, and the third is budget controls, which for me are really, really critical, okay? And don't forget, the more employees you have, the higher the expense claims will be, okay? So we need to be able to create efficient processes, we need efficient approval processes, we need to have proper supervision, etc. So here are the issues, right? When you're looking at the additional tax liabilities, right? When the expense claim fails to produce all of the required documents to be deducted for a company's income for corporate income tax purposes, this results in the business basically paying unnecessary taxes. So the most common practice that results in additional tax liabilities is reimbursing employees without having the procedures in place to thoroughly check for supporting VAT FAPYAOs. Other activities include incorrect FAPYAO information, missing supporting documents such as contracts, and then fake FAPYAOs, which I experienced personally. Without controls in place to check for these common mistakes, a business might be unknowingly increasing its tax liabilities come the end of the financial year. So foreign companies face mandatory annual tax adjustments where an external auditor will check for the completeness of supporting documents for employees' expense claims. And if any expense claims can be found to be missing documents or unqualified, the business will not be able to deduct those expenses. And if expenses are staff's personal expenses, the company will need to pay individual income tax in addition to the fine imposed by the tax bureaus for any of the tax shortages. In terms of employee fraud, well, just first of all, let's make it clear, it doesn't create an ethical environment within your organization because you are creating a cultural environment that is allowing employees to take advantage of you. And when one does it, be assured that all will do it, okay? Now, obviously, when employees are given authorization to make purchases, it empowers the business to run more efficiently, you have greater advantage of opportunities, etc. But you are putting a lot of integrity and best judgment into the hands of the employees, right? And obviously, this runs the risk that the employee takes advantage of it. So such employees will probably try to claim fake FAPYAOs, duplicate FAPYAOs, or FAPYAOs that are just irrelevant to the business activity for their own financial gain. And they're basically abusing the privilege that they were being they were being provided to, okay? So if nobody is supervising, right, I would do it myself. I would, book a dinner in and get reimbursed for it. Why not if nobody's checking? But you don't want to create a culture within your organization that promotes fraudulent behavior. You want to have these internal control systems in place. In relation to point 3, which is budget controls, right? Now, my whole spiel is you should be creating budgets for your China business. Now, if you are creating budgets, you are also creating budgets for the costs, right? And the whole point of the budget is to compare it to the actuals that are occurring. So the budget is acting as a financial controlling tool to make sure that the business remains on target with sales, with business development, with customer relationships, etc. But if this is left unchecked, again, employees can abuse this lack of control and spend excessively on things like travel without actually realizing the impact on the business, okay? So you've got to create within your finance team and within your company policies that you should be initiating control systems and creating a culture within your organization that if you've got a hotel budget that is, I don't know, 1,000 renminbi a night, that, if you go to a city where you can go to a 4-star and it's 600 and it's just as respectable and clean, go for the 600. Okay, you want to stimulate a culture where your employees are thinking in terms of the growth of your business. They're in alignment with the growth of your business. They understand the budget controls that are in place, and their goal or one of their KPIs should also be budget control. Okay, and they should be taking advantage of this. Now, common schemes in relation to expense claims are everything from fake FAPYAOs different expense by nature, inflated expenses, canceled expenses, expense splits, substitute FAPIAOs, fabricated business-related expenses. So for example, saying you went for a company dinner with a client, but you never actually had that dinner and you're giving still FAPIAOs in, or expenses that have not been actually self-initiated. So you've got to be aware that all of this will lead to the idea of missing FAPIAOs, and ultimately you should just have a rule within your organization that if an employee cannot provide a FAPIAO, they will not get an expense reimbursement. If there are duplicate or fake FAPIAOs, then you want to have your finance team to be able to check that, and you can check that because every FAPIAO will be recorded within your accounting system and also recorded within the government system, so your finance team can check that. For unrelated expense claims, you can do this on exceptions, but there has to be a level of transparency with the employee that you are fully aware of this, okay? If they are trying to hide it from you, for me, that is a case of fraud. If there's incorrect tax info on the FAPIAOs, right? If the FAPIAOs are incorrect or they have incomplete information, don't accept the FAPIAO. Okay, it should be just a very rigid rule. You don't accept it. Either they get a new one or you just don't book it. End of discussion. So these are all kind of things that you can create in terms of the expense claims, all right? Now, in terms of how to implement expense claim controls, well, ultimately, it is very important to clearly define and have transparent guidelines with every single employee in terms of the budgets and the company policies around surrounding allowances, okay? You should then have an organizational structure that authorizes and approves expenses. If you want to have a 1 or 2 tier system, so the line manager and then the finance person does it, absolutely fine, but you need to have clear transparency and communication in this, okay? So what you can do when you want to implement expense claim controls is 1, a creation of a template for employees to fill in terms of expense claims, or purchasing an app where employees can scan in the FAPIAOs directly into the system, and the approval process is through the online app. Getting the authorization and signature, is that going to be a 1, 2, 3 tier system? Collection of the original documents and cover page. So the cover page is usually the expense claim page, and having that audited by your finance team, okay? And then once you have, everybody has given the A-OK, it goes to the accounts payable and payment is then initiated. But this is basically a 5-step plan where internally you may have 1 to 3 different tiers of approvals just simply in regards to expense claim. Like I said, it is very, very intensive in terms of workload. But what you don't want is to create a bad culture within your organization where employees, without having operational guidelines, feel that they have the liberty and freedom to create whatever system they like. You should be the one creating that system. So your action plan should be to create operational guidelines in regards to, again, all of your core risks and needs associated with your company. All right, well, that's the end of today's presentation. I would love to know what your key takeaways were from today. If you want to give me up to 3, fantastic. But if you just simply want to give me one of your key takeaways, I would love that. There has not been a lot of interaction at all today, so I'm not sure if we're going to even have a Q&A. But again, you know, I love having interaction. I love to know what people learned. I would love to know if you found this webinar session useful. So please do type in and let me know. Basically, how we can help you is in relation to budget creation and validation, obviously tax advisory, implementation of ERP systems, which also includes the expense claim apps. We can do the full outsourcing or partial outsourcing of all of the ongoing compliance requirements, whether it's accounting, tax, VAT, bank, payroll, expense claim reimbursement. It's also creating operational guidelines and directives. We also do health checks and internal accounting and tax compliance reviews. If you are interested in having a one-to-one discussion with me, please don't hesitate. Happy to jump on a 15-minute call. In the chat section, I am going to put the link into my diary. So if you want to set up a call, please go ahead and do that. Happy to join on, and we can lead on to the Q&A. I mean, nobody has interacted today, so there are no questions that have popped in. So I will be hanging around. If people are still typing in, don't worry. Let's see. So Jihong was asking, how do you know if the Fapiao is fake? So Jihong, in Tuesday's webinar session, I was highlighting the whole VAT Fapiao concept. When you look at the special VAT invoices, there is a barcode that is in the top left-hand corner. If you scan that barcode, it links directly to the government system. And if it is authentic, of that invoice will pop up. It will indicate whether it has been used or not used. It will also indicate who is the ultimate owner of that Fapiao, so you can verify that information. And obviously, if it is fake, it's either been issued by somebody you have no clue who it is, has nothing to do with your business. You might even be able to indicate that it was a Fapiao from, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, which gives you an indication, i.e. it was produced 7 to 8 years ago, which gives you an indication it came from the black market. There are certain ways to figure out if the Fapiao was faked or not through that government website system and through the barcode. Do you have any, Jiong, let me know if you've got any other questions on that, or if there anybody else has any other questions as well. If not, I'll just move on. Like I said, guys, I've put in the link to the meeting diary. If you want to set up a 15-minute chat call, game plan session, please do. If you want to join our WeChat China Roadmap community, it's a community that I'm slowly growing up with companies that are either clients of mine or potential clients, or companies that I find have very good complementary services to what I do, i.e. there's absolutely no overlap. It's a great way to meet people and ask questions, share ideas, provide your own experiences. So if you do want to sign up to that, you can add me on WeChat. I'm putting this also into the chat section, so you have my WeChat ID. You can also add me on LinkedIn. My name on LinkedIn I will provide as well. And you can also email me too. I'm providing all of that info to you guys. So we've got one more session left tomorrow on Friday, which is going to be talking all about profit repatriation. So if you guys want to pop in for that session, just as a tip, it's very funny because for me, the majority of people who join this series usually join on day 1, which is looking at profits tax, and on day 2, which is and on day 5, which is profit repatriation, without even thinking how to develop proper tax planning and internal control systems, which was day 2, 3, and 4, that are fundamental to the operation of your business. People generally focus and have this mindset that they have to think about profits tax without realizing that potentially in the first 5 years of operation, they'll never have profit. So why do you even need to think about profits tax? And then profit repatriation strategies, which are fundamental and important to think about, but they don't even register their trademarks in China. So the most simplest form of profit repatriation, they can't even do. Without even thinking about, again, the internal control processes that are required. So if you have joined all 4 sessions so far, good on you, well done, because that is extremely helpful in regards to having a proper understanding about how to formally set up your business. Hi, Marta. I had absolutely no time to upload yesterday's webinar. You've got to be patient with me. It takes a long time. And I didn't have any time yesterday or this morning to do it. So it will be done either by the end of this week or early next week in terms of all the webinar sessions. All right. And trust me, anybody who has registered will get an email from me once I have done so. So that will be your note to know that it's been uploaded. Everybody, thank you so much for joining. Hold on. If you want to register for tomorrow's session and you haven't done so, it's at woodburnglobal.com/events. And I hope to see you all again very soon, or at least for tomorrow's session. Take care and goodbye.